Hi, I'm Sarah from Woven Rose Needlecraft, and this is the 6th part of the Woven Rose Guide to Cross Stitch. And in this part, we're going to be looking at some tools and accessories which you may need for your cross stitching. Now, I think it makes sense to start with needles. Now, cross stitch needles or tapestry needles differ from your regular sewing needle in that the tip of the needle is quite blunt. So of course, we're not piercing through fabric, we are simply passing our needle through holes that are already in the fabric. And so we don't need a very sharp tip. A blunt tip, which these needles have, does us quite nicely. So cross stitch needles come in many sizes, the most popular of which are sizes 24, 26 and 28, size 24 being the biggest, size 28 being smaller and thinner. Now, when I was a new stitcher, I was told that size 24 needles were for 14 count Aida, size 26 needles were for 16 count Aida, and size 28 needles were for 18 count Aida, and then of course their corresponding sizes in even weave. To be honest, I don't really follow that rule. I prefer to use size 28 for everything. It's just what I prefer. Of course, size 28 needles do have a smaller eye, so they can be a little bit trickier to thread because there's less room for the thread to go through. But because they are a thinner needle, they're easier to pass through the fabric, so you're not really getting any friction on the needle. Cross stitch needles, tapestry needles, are made by lots of brands. I would argue that possibly the most popular are John James and Bohan, which are from France. I have always just used Bohan needles. There's no particular reason. It's just what I started using and then stuck with it, and I find them to be really good quality. Quality is quite an important concern when you're using these needles, because I have seen lesser quality needles where the eye of the needle is quite rough, so the inside of the eye is quite rough. And what can happen is, because your thread is threaded through the eye of the needle, of course, the thread can actually become a little bit frayed, and then you can find your thread just snapping because it has become damaged by the actual needle. So just something to bear in mind when choosing your needles. Sometimes you see these bulk lots of 100 needles for a very low price. Just be sure that they are of good quality. You can actually get gold plated needles, and I have to be honest, I don't really like them. I find them to be a bit sticky, if that makes any kind of sense. That probably sounds mad, but actually a lot of people really like gold plated needles. Like so much with cross stitch and with needlecraft, it's very personal. It's such a tactile hobby that you kind of learn what you like and then you tend to stick to what you like. So that's needles. Next up is scissors, and a good quality pair of embroidery scissors is really beneficial when you're stitching. Although you may have a beautiful big pair of fabric scissors at home, they're usually not great for cross stitch because they're just too big to get into the back of your work and snip your ends. You want a nice quality pair of scissors. You don't have to spend a fortune, but you want a nice quality pair so that it's going to leave a nice clean cut on your thread. And that's really important when you're trying to thread your needle. You want a very clean, even cut so that it will just slip through the eye of your needle. So here we have quite a standard pair of embroidery scissors, a really nice size. I have quite big hands, but these are perfect for me. And then here I have a very jazzy pair of thread snips. So thread snips are really handy. Slightly different than scissors, but do a great job. And again, quality, these are very heavy actually, these are beautiful, these were a gift. And good quality, really important to get that nice, sharp, even cut. Now, we must talk about stork scissors. I don't think there is any symbol more associated with needlecraft throughout history than the stork scissors. Now, there is a lot of debate about why stork scissors have become so associated with needlecraft and embroidery and cross stitch. One story is that midwives, years and years ago, when they were waiting for a baby to be born, they would be working away on their needlecraft, and then they would use the same scissors to cut their thread that they would use to cut the umbilical cord of the baby. I'm not 100% sure if that's true. I think maybe stories have become mixed. It could be true. I'm not arguing with it. I'm going to look it up. Maybe one day we'll do a whole video just on stork scissors. But I think there is definitely a connection with midwifery, and obviously storks bring babies. I don't know. But stork scissors, it's funny because you see a lot of them on the market and they look really pretty. And without being horrible, a lot of them aren't great quality. And the reason is because a lot of them have coated blades. And you don't want that. You want a bare metal blade on a scissors. But because there's no separation between handle and blade, they're just a solid piece of metal, a lot of them will have this coating on it, and then that can peel over time and leave you with a mess. So if you're going to get a stork scissors, it might even be a nice gift. If someone is looking to get you a gift and you think, yeah, this needlecraft jazz is really my thing, I think I'm going to stick with that, it's a really nice gift. These pair are very, very special. They are from a company called Ernest Wright, which is a Sheffield-based company who make embroidery scissors, but make lots of different types of scissors. And they have a very, very interesting story. If you want to go and look it up, how the company was kind of brought back to life. And obviously Sheffield, such a city that is so synonymous with craftsmanship and metalwork and industry, and perhaps as time has gone on and as industry in Europe and in Britain and England in particular sort of faded away, the company began to kind of die, and then it was brought back to life, and they're using a lot of the old techniques and the old equipment, and they have a fantastic social media presence. I sound like I'm paid. I'm not. I just genuinely have an interest in anything to do with history. I studied history in university, and I love to see things like this. I love to see industry coming back and craftsmanship coming back. And although these were more expensive than your maybe average pair of scissors, they didn't break the bank. I think at the time they were about €40. At the time when I got these, there was a waiting list. I don't believe there is a waiting list anymore. I think you can just buy them online. And I bought them with some money that was in a card that was given to me by colleagues of a job that I was leaving. And I had very fond memories of the job and of the people that I worked with. So these are a really, really special addition to my cross-stitch tool collection. And more than anything, they're a really, really good pair of scissors. So there you are. That is scissors. And you obviously don't need lots of pairs of scissors like I have. Just get yourself one good pair that you think you're going to like and you think are going to do a good job, and then you're set. So unless you're going to stitch in hand, by which I mean that you're going to hold your fabric loose and stitch away like that, you're probably going to want a hoop or a frame of some description to keep the working part of your fabric taut. I have a few types here in front of me, and of course I have to start with the beloved embroidery hoop, the wooden embroidery hoop. Now, I spoke about the stork scissors being a symbol very much associated with needlecraft throughout the years, and I think the same has to be said for the embroidery hoop. How many paintings have we seen of ladies with their hoop and their piece of fabric trailing down over their lap, and they're wearing a beautiful gown and they're in their garden or whatever they're up to, or seen it in a period drama or read it in a book. These are a really, really beautiful way to hold your fabric, but they're also a really useful way to hold your fabric, and they do their job really, really well. You simply loosen the nut, place your fabric over the bottom hoop, kind of stretch it out, and then place your top hoop back over it, and then tighten up the nut again. And some of them, including this one, actually have somewhere where you can pop in a screwdriver if you want it really tight. Don't over tighten them because you can crack the wood, but you'll get there and you'll figure out how to use them. It's not very difficult, and they're really, really useful. I, however, prefer to use one of these guys, and this is a Q-snap. So it's just a plastic frame. Works, I suppose you could say, in a similar way to a hoop. You drape your fabric across the frame, and then you take your plastic clamps and you just clamp them back on. and then you can sort of adjust your fabric and make sure that your fabric is at the correct tension. The clamps on these, or these little parts, these slider parts, can loosen over time if you put them in the dishwasher, or you just soak them in some warm water, not boiling hot, but some warm water. They do tend to shrink back, and then you get your nice tight grip again. And like our hoops, they do come in different sizes. I actually prefer this one. This one's a bit big. I prefer the smaller one. They're not as pretty as the hoop, but they're really, really useful. And again, with the scissors, with the needles, with everything, you're going to find what works best for you and what you're comfortable using. And you may have also seen stitchers using what's called a scroll frame. I don't actually have one here to show you, but it is basically a frame that you attach your fabric to on the bottom and the top. The sides are usually left free, and then there's a system of rollers where you can move your fabric along, a little bit like the way a loom works for weaving, where you have a roller at either end and then you can just move your fabric along very slowly. Scroll frames are really, really popular with stitchers, particularly stitchers working on quite large pieces. And yeah, definitely maybe worth looking into. Probably more expensive than your hoop or your Q-snap, but again, as you get your bearings in the hobby, that might be something you want to look into. Something else which you might want to look into as time goes on is the lap stand. So here I just have this little lap stand here, and I'm not really going to demonstrate it because it's not the most graceful of things, but you sort of jam this bit underneath your leg, and then you can adjust the height of your clamp, and then you can put your hoop into the clamp, or some of these come with hoops already built in, and it's just a great way of giving you a hands-free approach to your stitching. So because the actual stand is holding the hoop, you don't have to hold it in your hand, and then you have both hands to work on, or you can stitch with one hand and mark off your chart on the other hand. The clamp is big enough to fit a Q-snap, but personally I prefer to use these with an embroidery hoop. I think they're probably better off used with a hoop. I think a Q-snap is too big and too heavy for one of these, although I do think you could possibly use it with a scroll frame. Not a massive one, but if you had a smaller scroll frame, you could probably use a stand with it, or this stand with it. Obviously there are lots of stands available. This is an El Bessie one, and it wasn't too expensive. There's also the larger stands that are freestanding, so they stand on the ground and then they sort of come up and they hold your frame in front of you, and they're really handy. But again, these are probably things you're not going to be investing in straight away if you're brand new to the hobby. Just something to have at the back of your mind for later on. Something that you may notice I have on my piece here, on my stand, is this little guy. And this is a little silicone cable tie, I suppose, that is just holding up my fabric, and it's also holding my needle in place because it's magnetic. So if I just pop down my frame here, I'll try and show you one of these up close. So they're just these little magnetic silicone cable ties, and I think they're actually designed and sold more so for like electrical cables in your house. But what you can do is you can just put this end on the back of your fabric, or the back of your piece, and then sort of roll up your fabric, and then use this end to clamp it all in place, or to hold it all in place, and then the two attach magnetically through your fabric. And again, like I said, they hold your needle. These are something that you're not probably going to find in a needlecraft shop, but you can get them online or Amazon or wherever you want to have a look for them. And yeah, they're really, really good. One thing I will say is they do have a tendency to stick together, and I think a lot of people put that down to the magnets being strong. I don't think so. I think it's because it's silicone. Like if you have a silicone swimming cap and it gets stuck together. So sometimes, I mean, I'm probably not meant to do this, but sometimes I just get a tiny little bit of baby powder, talcum powder, and just rub it in between, and then they just slide off easier. So yeah, something else to look into. So here I have these little guys, and they are called needle minders, and unsurprisingly their job is to mind your needle. So just like the magnetic cable ties, they have a magnet, and you put the pretty side on the front of your work and this little detachable magnet on the back, they attach, they stay in place, and then you can just let your needle stick onto the front, and so you always have your needle handy. And then of course it prevents you from sticking your needle through the fabric and then leaving it there, and over time that can cause marks to appear in your fabric, rust and whatnot, so you don't want that. So these are really, really handy if you're not going to use the cable ties, which kind of do the same job. Of course, I have to say that they do have these very small detachable magnets on the back. If you have pets and if you have small children, of course, be very, very careful if you're using these, because these little magnets, as any parent or pet owner I'm sure will know, can do an awful lot of damage if they're swallowed. So just something to bear in mind. But yeah, when used correctly, they're really pretty and they do a really, really important job keeping your needles safe and ready to go, because the amount of needles that stitchers lose is incredible. Breaking needles is one thing, but just losing them and never ever finding them is quite something else. So there you go, there's your needle minder. In front of me here I have a little beeswax thread conditioner, and I find thread conditioner really, really handy for smoothing down the ends of threads that don't want to go through the eye of a needle. I find them particularly useful with metallic threads, which can often fray at the ends, and then it's just impossible to thread them into the needle. So thread conditioner is really, really useful for that. I personally don't go overboard with my thread conditioner. There is a lot of discussion about whether thread conditioner can cause discoloration. So for example, if you're using white fabric or white thread and it's been coated with thread conditioner and that has never been washed out, there are people who have said that over the years with oxidation and so on, it has caused slight discoloration of their finished piece. There are other debates which say that that only happens with synthetic thread conditioner. It doesn't happen with beeswax thread conditioner. I'm not going to give any guarantees. I use it sparingly. It is fantastic when it's needed. I don't go overboard, and I would say just do your own research with that one, because I don't want to be responsible for anybody's piece being damaged or discolored over time. Finally, I wanted to show you this little guy, and this is a neck light, and I think it's actually designed more so for reading than it is for crafting, but it is fantastic for crafting. You simply loop it around your neck and you can adjust it, and then it has two little lights on either side, and you can obviously turn it on and then adjust the color tone and the intensity of the light, and it's really, really wonderful to have it around your neck when you're stitching. At least it is in my opinion. As the evenings draw in and autumn moves very swiftly towards winter, getting natural light is harder and harder, and so many of us stitch in the evenings, and so many people stitch, you know, once they're home from work and they've had their dinner and their kids are in bed, that's when they turn to their stitching, and sometimes you just don't have enough light from the overhead light or from lamps to see your work and see what you're doing. This is particularly important when working with smaller counts of fabric or higher counts of fabric, so your 32 count and your 36 count and so on, and also when working with your darker colours of fabric. Darker colours are usually harder to work on than lighter colours. It can be even more difficult to see those tiny, tiny little holes. So investing in good lighting, whether that is a neck light, which is what I like to use, or something that clips on, or a lamp that's going to, you know, stretch over your piece, whatever, just try and get your lighting sorted, because working in low light situations when you're trying to craft is really, really difficult. It's straining your eyes, it's frustrating you. There's no need for it. It can be prevented by something which is not very expensive. So there you go. There's a neck light. So that's it for tools and accessories. That's everything I could think of. If you can think of anything else that you think a stitcher might need, please, please, please do let us know. I would love to know if there's any gadgets or tools that I'm missing out on. I'm always trying to make my stitching easier and even more enjoyable. Next week, we will finally be getting onto the actual stitching. So all the videos so far have been building up to next week's video, and I know I spent a lot of time talking about charts and materials, and now of course tools and accessories. But that was done because I really think it's so important for people to really understand these materials and understand the charts and find the design and find the materials that they really want to work with, and that's going to give them a piece that they really, really love. Cross stitch, like so many crafts, is so time consuming that you want to make sure that not only you enjoy the process of creating the piece, but you enjoy the finished piece. And so this is why I thought it was so important to really let everyone know that there's a huge amount of variety out there. And I hope that if you have picked the piece that you want to stitch, and if you are now in the process of gathering up all your materials and all your tools and the accessories that you might need, that you're really, really happy with your choice and you're really excited to actually get going. And that's going to be next week. So I will see you then.